Mike, Professor
And
Mike Barnes.
and you. Yeah, we haven't met before, have we? I don't think so.
No, this is a
It's
new,
good. I've
I've never had the pleasure. Let me introduce myself to you. So,
yeah.
I'm here in Seattle, Washington, the USA. I'm a physician and also a geographer. So an
Okay.
MD, PhD. I've always been interested in research and innovation in the field of medicine, and I kind of took a social science and policy route because I'm interested kind of in public health and public
Yeah.
policy and sort of issues of justice, and also a geography standpoint because I'm really interested in integrative health and human environment relationship as it applies to health and disease. And I've always been fascinated by geography. Um, and yeah, I've lived in Scotland for a few months when I was in college, so I got an
All right.
experience with a different
Yeah.
part of the world in Edinburgh.
Yes.
So that was great. I met some Newcastle folks in my
Oh, good.
university at the
And
time. So
you understood what they were saying, did you?
yeah, yeah. Compared to the some
Yeah.
of the more rural Scottish folks, yeah, I was.
Yeah. 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 That's for sure. Yeah.
So it was great. So yeah, I mean I'm after my specialty in medicine. I completed training in two areas: hospice and palliative medicine as my primary subspecialty, and then also physical medicine and rehabilitation, with a lot of focus on pain and neurorehabilitation. But I've done a lot of
Yeah.
work in end of life care, palliative care, consultation, and now I'm doing I have started an integrative medicine practice with a naturopathic physician called the Ames Institute, where we have a large team, or like 10 plus providers of different stripes, doing work in chronic and serious illness at the cutting edge. We like to think, in terms of integrating
Mm.
natural
That's
therapies,
interesting. Yeah.
mind body spirit medicine, psychedelic assisted therapy, cannabis assisted therapy,
Right.
and other herbs and approaches, just to have more of a time with patients and to kind of get out of
Mm.
some of the rat race the issues that can occur in the large system. So I'm also on
Yeah.
faculty and I teach. I'm at the University of Washington,
Right.
affiliate professor there. So I get involved in those things, but that's what I've been up to. And as far as cannabis goes, that's been my area of topic of focus in my graduate work. And I'm still really, yeah, I'll tell you more about that as we go. I'd love to hear more about you.
Okay. Well, then that's interesting because we don't really have that tradition in the UK as much as you do of integrative medicine, as you could call it. I wish we did, because I think I've really changed my view over the last few years, because I'm a neurologist. I was brought up in straight neurology, moved into academic neurology. Then I got a bit fed up with that. And I felt it was just one diagnosis after the other, and we didn't follow people up. We just diagnosed them and said, off you go. You've got multiple sclerosis. Off you go. And I felt that was very unsatisfactory. So I moved, like you were, into neurological rehabilitation and became a chair of neurological rehabilitation.
Wow.
Set up the World Federation of Neurorehabilitation way back 25 or so years ago now. And we had the first conference in Newcastle, where I'm from, in north of England.
Wow.
And I've always been interested over that, perhaps the last 20 years, in cannabis, because I was initially running a multiple sclerosis clinic. People were coming to me and saying they found they were using cannabis illegally 20 years ago, and they were finding it really helpful for their pain and their muscle spasm in that context, particularly. So I thought there must be something to this. So I asked people coming to the clinic, do you use it? And people were very honest with me, and about half of them said they did use it. I thought, well, there must be something to this, because these were severely disabled people who were getting it on the illegal market, and they wouldn't be
Right.
doing that unless it
Right.
was helpful. So that triggered my interest, and I helped a little bit with the development of Sativex. I don't know if you have that in the States from
Not
GW
yet,
Pharma. Yeah.
Yeah, somehow they never made it across the finish line here.
Yeah, I don't know. It's okay, and I helped with that. It helps. It was licensed for multiple sclerosis spasticity, and it turned out, as you know, to be the first licensed cannabis medicine. Then nothing much happened in the UK because we have a body that looks at the cost effectiveness of things, called NICE, ironic name,
Yeah.
National Institute for Clinical Excellence. Some of their deliberations are certainly not nice. And they said it wasn't cost effective. They were probably right with that,
Yeah.
but initially.
Mhm.
But then cannabis sort of re-emerged about 5 or 6 years ago. I was asked to do a report on it for a government body, an all-party parliamentary group, as we call them over here. Then I was
An
asked to get
all-party,
involved
what do you
as an
call it? An
all-party parliamentary group. It's a sort of unofficial
parliamentary group.
lobbying body of members of parliament from all parties who
Okay.
join together for a particular issue. So there's a lot of them, everything from sort of road transport through everything you can think of. There's a sort of lobby group for, and there was one on drug policy. So I did a review for that
Oh,
drug
wow.
policy group,
Okay.
and then I got involved with a little boy called Alfie Dingley, who was at the time was 6, and he was a little bit like Charlotte Figge across in the States.
Mm. I've
His
spoken to her.
mother was
She's,
I had never met them.
she's
And
passed away now,
oh
unfortunately.
yeah, it's sad, very sad. But Alfie was our Charlotte, if you like,
Mm.
and his mother campaigned very well to get cannabis for her son Alfie. They'd
Mm.
gone to Holland to get it. They didn't want to live in Holland, so they wanted to come back to the UK with the medicine that was by then working. And so they had a very good campaign, which I helped them with, and we got the first ever license for cannabis in the UK and the first prescription for cannabis in the UK.
That's
So
great.
we're going to take up 20 minutes of me prattling on if I'm not careful. But since then, I'm now full-time cannabis, and I run a thing called the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society in the UK, which is most of the doctors, and a thing called the Cannabis Industry Council, which is a sort of trade body with about 120 companies, all UK focused. So I'm now just pure cannabis now.
Oh,
So
wow. Fascinating. You really you really become super specialized in your rehabilitation to this.
Yeah, it's a bit of a change in my last, a bit of a strange end to a career, I guess. To move, but so I've moved from mainstream neurology and being a little bit skeptical of, I suppose you could say, herbal medicine or integrative medicine. Now I'm much less so. I've very much attuned to it now. A bit come to a bit late in life, but I've got there in the end. So no.
That's great. Yeah. That's great. I go, wow. Thank you so much for introducing yourself. I have a couple of thoughts and questions just based on, just to hear your trajectory and I know that I also was in that same place where I didn't really know much about plant medicines or herbal medicines, but really when I learned about cannabis and its role in conditions, I saw the studies, I saw patients, I was like, well, what else is there? That's a very impressive change, that you can see. I remember some of these studies in MS show it improved walking, in some patients, ambulatory outcomes in the larger follow-up arms of the large studies that a lot of them were done in the UK, these oral extracts of cannabis. And I was, man, this is really this is significant. That may be modifying the disease itself if you're able to have better ambulation. It's not just palliation of symptoms, which is wonderful, of course, and improve things, but maybe you're also impacting the underlying illness. And so more and more I studied cannabis in detail. It was like, well, okay, it looks like, oh, there's other compounds that can kind of synergize with cannabinoids too, and also have a nice history. And that's sort of how it started for me. So it sounds like you also took a similar awareness, learning from people.
Exactly.
And by the way, you and I are both in the northern latitudes, even though we're like thousands of miles apart here. I'm in Washington State, and you're in northern England. And there is a geography to multiple sclerosis, which is a kind of one of the mysteries of the condition. And that was one of the early things I was learning about. So both of our places in the world have higher rates of MS compared to other places in the world. And we both are in places where patients discovered cannabis because, that's what they needed to find some solution to these really vexing condition that affects.
Exactly.
So that's sort of a similar thing happened here, in terms of discovery of this. I remember some of the early MS doctors here, kind of starting to have those moments. Dr. Bowen, he was a professor in our medical school, and would sort of make mention of it. And I remember meeting MS patients. They were the first ones that, one guy moved all the way from Illinois, and he said, I'd rather be I don't want to be a prisoner in my own body. So I'd rather, risk prison, some other kind of prison, so I'm not a prisoner in my own body. And so he moved across the state, when he was having his own, all the different symptoms, an old middle-aged man with MS. So I've seen significant things in that field. And boy, I've also seen like the hemming and hawing and the MS societies and sort of, we can't really get the data right and how to make sense of it. Nobody's sort of recognizing, okay, patients really need something. And if there's something here and if it's safe, and can be monitored, like let's continue to learn, but let's also continue to recognize what we know so far and it was always like that kind of, it was not that position. It was always, well, we don't really know enough, so we can't really say anything. So, tough luck. And
I find that very difficult because, I mean, one of the questions they suggested we talked about was what are these challenges? What we face in the UK, and it may be the case in the US, I'd be interested to hear, was that most of the doctors, most of my colleagues are so skeptical about it. And, we've had children with drug-resistant epilepsy who have 300 or 400 seizures a month, if not a week. Alfie was in that category. They've failed on all licensed medications, nothing else to offer at all. And yet the pediatric neurology community, particularly in the UK, have said, no, we're not going to try cannabis. And I find that very difficult to understand because there's nothing else to try. And it's, as you said, it's safe. It's not going to work for everybody, but it works for a lot of the children. Probably we did a study in the UK from the Drug Science Project that showed 96% of children had a response.
Wow.
Not necessarily a great response in some, but a great response in others. Why not try it as it's safe? If it doesn't work, you've got nothing to lose. And that's one of the challenges I face in the UK is getting most of the doctors on board with it. We have just put a number on it for you. There's several tens of thousands of doctors in the UK. I think the number is 128,000.
That's the total number of physicians in the country.
Total number of qualified doctors, medical doctors in the UK.
Okay.
There's 120 prescribing doctors.
Oh my God. The first thing that comes to mind, I know that scenario, and it sort of there was like that in some of the early states of when we had medical cannabis laws, that have now been in place since '96, but not every state. But in the early states and early places, it was always these very single digit or double digit, even though the academy or the body was much thousands and thousands more. But one of the things that I've always I know is an issue because as a practicing doc myself, the amount of red tape that is needed, and any particular, if I have to write a whole detailed application with lots and lots of documentation and my medical records and collation of this and collection of experts and doing all these things just to sort of get an approval for something that might take a while, and it's sort of it's very disheartening. And then you wonder, am I are they sort of am I going to get singled out for audit and review now that I'm doing this thing that's kind of controversial? Those are always the barriers that I think, and unfortunately, the other thing is that most people don't know that, you might think, oh gosh, I'm going to do this. Let's say you're trying to treat somebody that's dying of sepsis, and that giving them a liter of fluid is going to change their life, but you have to go through tons of red tape to get that liter of fluid ordered. But you might do it because you have seen it over and over again in the hospital in your training, how much fluid hydration, resuscitation makes in the life of somebody who's got sepsis, like it saves their life. But here in cannabis, and in the anti-epileptic, neuromodulatory, anti-neuroinflammatory, all those protective things, you don't hardly ever see that. Like, where have I ever walked into a ward and I've seen like the before and after? And so one of the things that I would do when I gave talks back in the old days, I remember I gave a talk in India once at a medical college there in Orissa State, and a few other places. I actually, even with neurologists, I think I would show videos, of movement disorder patients. Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I thought the movement disorder is so stark, Parkinsonian features.
Mm.
And there was, the Israelis were making some excellent documentation of their changes
Yeah.
in the subjects, and those really, like, that was and then I also saw there was a Tourette's cases too
Yes.
in
Yes.
Germany. So I would have these videos, and that those kinds of things are very hard. You can't sort of fake that, and it was like
Yeah.
as convincing as saving a life. So I want to suggest that as a
Yeah,
sometimes
I think they're
people,
incredibly convincing, but many of our colleagues just say, "Well, if it hasn't got a double-blind, placebo-controlled study, it's a waste of time," and
mm,
that's the attitude of many of the British medics.
mm,
They look upon it as a pharmaceutical when you can do double-blind, placebo-controlled studies, and that's a perfectly good way to do things. But the cannabis plant, of course, you can't do that. It's so complicated. 100 and what is the number now? 157 cannabinoids, 100 terpenes, 100 flavonoids. You can't make a double-blind, placebo-controlled study out of that. It's a very personalized medicine. You can't make a placebo. It's
oh
just not possible.
no,
It's
but
just
I
not
mean there
possible.
are plenty of like you can extrapolate. I used to visit the lab when I was at NYU for my residency. I went
Yeah,
to visit Oren Davinsky, and he's
yeah, yeah,
epileptologist. Probably you're aware of his work, and he was
yeah,
one of the early Epidiolex clinical trialists,
yeah,
in the U.S. I remember he showed me, like, this is the safe that we ordered, and we're still waiting on the medicine. This is before they got things started, but I mean,
yeah.
because of his work and the University of Alabama and other centers, we got really good double-blind, controlled trials of one particular formulation. And I think that's
Yeah, I think that's the point. I should have clarified that. I think isolates, like Epidax isn't quite an isolate, is it? But it's nearly. You
mhm,
can do that. That's great.
mhm,
My
mhm,
objection to that and Sativex is too effectively two isolates put together. So you can do a double-blind placebo controlled on that. Absolutely great. I don't think you can do them satisfactorily on the full spectrum product.
mm.
And in my view, I like to see what you feel. I think the full spectrum product is much better than the isolate products,
Well, yeah,
clearly. And so it's those products. I mean, doctors in the UK will be happy to have isolate CBG or CBD or
yeah,
THC, whatever.
right.
But they would miss out. My view is, why develop an isolate when the plant as a whole is so much better than the individual components?
Oh, yeah.
So I mean, and so that's my objection to them. Is they're obsessed with isolate pharmaceuticalizing cannabis, if you like.
Monomolecular medicine is
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
one funny term I've heard on that
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
that the bent, and it's like we've done some amazing things in the chemistry labs. I have a chemistry degree myself, and I've seen
Right.
all kinds of things. But boy, it's sort of a sense that the plant chemistry is too messy, too much. We can't track it, and
Yeah.
I think that's a lack of experience. Just sort of knowing a different form of medicine. And in England,
Mm.
I mean, the history of herbal therapies goes back thousands of years.
Yeah. It
They,
does.
it was where things began, and I think. You only need to look at that, and then you just. I would always make jokes like, well, okay, well, if you like, do you enjoy tea for its rich body, or if I could just give you a caffeine pill, would that be enough for you? English, of course, love their tea, so I kind of
Yes.
there are other places where we understand, like, oh yeah, for good quality taste and for the aroma and even there's a
Mm.
psychoactive experience with tea nobody wants to talk about, but it's a calming. Theanine is there in green tea and caffeine, and so there's
Yeah.
all kinds of like mixing that we're used to. But when it comes to medicine, we want
Yeah.
we
That's a
want, we
very
want
good.
dosing. I think dosing is important, and so you say to folks, well, we can analyze and test sort of the leading, some of the key botanical drug substances in this
Sure.
mixture, like CBD or CBN
Yeah.
or THC, and then testing it. Then there's going to be a spectrum of minor cannabinoids that are synergents, and that's
Yeah.
it's going it might it depends on, like, are you going to standardize this for the whole population? Or are you doing this for a small subset? Is this just for my one patient, or is this for a collection of patients? I think that that's sort of where people want, like, hey, how can I have a because look, when I'm treating seizures, and I tell this to patients in the early days when they come to me, like, you get a seizure disorder, if we go off of the pharmaceuticals, of course, which may or may not be helping, that's one thing. But if whatever they did, you always knew that you'd be able to get an exact duplicate of that same medicine the following month and the following month and the following month, until, barring some shortages. But if we switch you over to cannabis, and now it's something that's helping you, but it was a particular variety with this particular chemical fingerprint that was really hit all the right modulations, and we know there's huge genetic diversity. But I don't know when that batch is done, if they're going to be able to grow again another batch that's similar enough. So you do enter into an area of, oh well, gosh, what's going to happen to me after that? I mean, that's a real worry. I think that, and some patients also will worry, like, I'll feel better for a while, but what's the point if I won't feel better for a year, or if I won't change my functional ability enough consistently that I can go to school? In the case of these children. So those are some of the, out of those valid fears, I think there's some things to acknowledge there. But the solution to that is not just sort of not use it. You sort of support the people like you're doing. It sounds
exactly.
Like
yeah. The solution is not to ignore it, because it's here to stay now. I mean, we've got now, tiny numbers. We've got 22,000 people in the UK prescribed. Sadly, all but three privately.
Wow.
Most of our system in the UK, some of the listeners may not be aware, is 90% of healthcare in the UK is the National Health Service, which is the government sector.
Yes.
NHS. There's 3 prescriptions on NHS and 22,000 private.
Oh my God, I didn't know that. Wow.
Which is crazy, and the people have to pay out their own pocket. But nevertheless, despite that, it's getting.
How much do they have to pay? Like, what do you mean pay? Pay for the medical service,
probably,
or pay for the medicine?
Yeah, they have to pay privately for the doctor's consultation, which has come down in price now. It's subsidised in a sense by the clinics at about £50 to £100 sterling, which these days with the British economy, it's about the same as the dollar.
Right.
And then you pay for the medicine. It depends what you get, clearly, but on average, maybe $300 a month. And you multiply that by 12 plus the consultation fee, you're looking at $4,000 or $5,000 a year, and a lot of people can't afford that. It's outside, and that's out of their own pocket. There's no insurance or anything.
Right.
So it's although I'm quite positive. Well, the law was changed in November 18. We've got people prescribed, which we didn't have 4 years ago, but it's been slow, and we reckon there's something like 1.4 million people who use cannabis for medical purposes every year in the UK. Add to that, let's make a number up almost, another 500,000 who probably would benefit but don't want to criminalize themselves.
Right.
So you've got conservatively about 2 million people, and so we're about 1% of the total cannabis potential benefiting population after 4 years. So at this rate, it'll be about another 300 years before we get everyone treated.
Professor, let me ask you another sort of factor that came into play in the U.S. In my experience over these years with this population was the rise of non-marijuana or associated, cannabis products through the production of CBD-rich, quote-unquote, industrial hemp. That sort of area opened up. Has that made because that has less, because there's less worry about psychoactivity. It's a little less regulated and easier. So is it easier? Is that making any inroads?
It's a little bit. We can get those products over the counter. You don't need a doctor's prescription. The problem we've got, of course, you may have the same problem in the States. They're not regulated so much. They're they're called they're food supplements. They're logged as. You can't make medical claims, so people don't quite know which to use. There's been a lot of fuss about some labeling not being really quite accurate. There's 258 cannabis companies selling products in the UK, and those that fulfilled all the criteria of not being able to advertise them were down in the tens rather than the 200s.
Wait, sorry. So you have 258 companies. Is that hemp or just cannabis? That's
industrial hemp. So it's over-the-counter CBD products, which of course, as you know, and the audience will know, it can help people, but not as much as the full-spectrum product with all the other minor cannabinoids and terpenes. The CBD or CBD-only products are are okay. But not that brilliant. But you can. It's easy. A lot of people go there first because it's easier to pop in the chemist, buy one over the counter. But the trouble is they don't know what they're buying. They don't know what dose to take.
Yeah.
The companies can't tell them what dose to take because they're not
Uh,
allowed to say that because it's not a
oh.
medicine.
Oh.
So it's a bit of a mess.
They can't
To be
write
honest.
anything on the label that says a standard dose
No,
is 50 milligrams or something.
no. All you can say is the maximum dose you can take is 70 milligrams a day.
I
And
see.
as we know, that's for some people that's not enough.
Right.
If the average is 60 to 100 milligrams, say it's about right.
Yes.
That maximum of 70 automatically rules out 3/4 of the people who might
Yes.
benefit.
Well, especially in your patient
Is
population, but
exactly, yeah, exactly. So it's though we have got CBD has never been regulated as a medicine, but it's a bit of a mess,
mm,
frankly. It's not good.
well, I hear that it was a mess. It was a big mess here too. Then they federally
Yeah,
changed things. A lot of like states started growing it, and the prices came down. And
yeah,
then people started, I personally like found people that really were reputable, that had experience in clinical, that were also working on
yeah,
these companies, and I saw their certificates of analysis. They tried to make it as potent as they could, full
yeah,
spectrum. I
yeah,
mean, what that means is in our case is that you could still make um, a range of terpenes and other compounds in there, and even minor cannabinoids, CBG, CBN. You just can't have much THC, and
yeah,
and of course, and if you need THC, like what I would do for folks is like, well, maybe we can prescribe that some other
yeah,
monomolecular THC route and add that in there if we need to sort of
yeah,
mix the
yeah,
two.
yeah,
But that gave a little some help, because Epidiolex, which is the one that we were talking about earlier,
yeah.
is very expensive and it's hard to get prescribed. So
Right,
there's really
right.
no CBD options for patients aside from that. I mean, there is the sort of state level markets. Of course, none of them are covered either, like in any
Yeah, yeah,
whatever schemes we do have here. But it is an option that I think that's also going to stay, and I think it'll be better if people start to develop a little bit more high quality in that area, so your patients can get 100 milligrams a day of
yeah.
CBD with that method. And I think that there's companies in our states that are doing that, and I don't see why
Mm,
they won't
mm.
show up there, as long as there's a. So you say that these companies can't advertise, though, huh? There's no way for them
No,
to.
they can't make any medical claims at all, which is odd.
But
The,
can
the,
they say
the,
that they? Oh, okay.
you can make sort of vague, it's a very grey area. You can say sort of aches and pains of daily life. You say the stresses and the strains of daily life, because that's sort of not medical. In other words, you can treat pain and anxiety. It's all very grey. Some people push the boundaries a little bit. A few companies make ridiculous claims like it's going to cure all your cancer and all that sort of stuff. But they shouldn't.
No.
So it's very difficult. And we got some crazy laws. And one law is, which is just to illustrate it, the CBD, you can't have more than 1 milligram of THC per container. Now that sounds okay until you think of the size of the container. So you can have a legal CBD over the counter in a small bottle, because it's got less than 1 milligram of THC in it. Let's pretend. If you put exactly the same oil in a bigger bottle,
Mm.
it will have more than 1 milligram of THC in it, because you've doubled or tripled the volume, and that becomes illegal. So
Oh,
the same stuff is legal depending on the size of the bottle you put it in.
it's a packaging.
How is that? That's not totally crazy. So we've got a lot of anomalies, and in the UK, it's only hospital specialists that can initiate prescription.
Is that right?
Ordinary general
Okay.
practitioners, primary care physicians can't.
Oh, that's a huge restriction.
That's a big restriction. They can
Oh
do
my God.
follow-ups. And then the
Oh,
other thing is, any doctor wanting to prescribe it has got to get approval from a peer group of colleagues. So you can't just write a prescription thinking this is what I want to do for my patient. You've got to say, this is what I want to do, but I've got to take it to a panel of my colleagues to approve it, which
after you
is
write it, you have to like
after
they have to have some
you
kind of
can't
meeting.
write it. You have
Where,
to have a meeting. You can say a clinic once a week or something like that. They meet and go through. I want to prescribe this for this person, that for that person, and it just adds a totally unnecessary layer of bureaucracy. So, although we've come a long way in the UK, we're way, way behind you across there. So,
yeah, well, that's funny. I thank you for sharing that, and that's a struggle. I know those. I remember these kinds of days, and in different contexts. This is
yeah,
like and I've lived in New York before there was a law there, in a
Yeah.
major, hugely populated place. And I'm from Oklahoma, which had the most restricted laws, but I can tell you, like, things changed literally overnight, with the strong efforts of lobbying and advocacy, for Charlotte's Web and other things. Like, things really changed, and now, Oklahoma has like very wide. There's a much more liberal attitude, and I think we really need some liberalism in our approach to cannabis. We have become the conservatism. This is conservative. This is a political issue, a political problem of fear, and I've associated this with the phobia of psychoactivation, which I think is tied to because THC actually has a lot of salubrious, salutary effects. There's a great public health studies that have come out of University of Indiana. There's a professor there who's done these really nice analyses of like the reduction in obesity rates. You can study even cancer diagnoses, a few other things at a public health level. If you look at a correlation, there's a number of other correlations. I think THC is actually, so I think what it comes down to is a little bit of this fear of psychoactivation, and how do we deal with what I consider that falls in the recreational use of drugs. Is really a part of the human experience of dealing with existential reality of life and death. Honestly, if you don't have any recreation and you just go through life like that, your life quality will be very poor, and you don't have a way to get out of the constant dread of dying. I mean, we're all going to die one day, and everybody. I just want to say, I think this is an issue that I would recommend, like, starting to open up a little bit, because once people sort of relax their worries about, oh gosh, somebody somewhere may be smiling a bit much or having a little bit of a reverie. My God, what has the world come to? And when we're really supposed to be, and of course, English culture is known for, not being prim, but also being sort of in witty internally and having a bit of a laugh. But so I think it's understandable that people are going to need some range of recreation, because it's part of what I consider the spiritual or existential, not just me, many doctors and field of palliative care and integrative medicine. We know that that's necessary, because you're not going to be able to deal with them more. So if we can, and then if we say, okay, is THC part of that spectrum? Is alcohol part of that spectrum? Is mushrooms part of that? Like, what other are there drugs? Does pharmacology have a role to play in spiritual and recreational human life? If so, how are we going to make sense of that? Are we going to be so militant about like drawing a line that we won't even treat and fund the care of disabled children with chronic seizure disorders? I mean, that is what it's coming to. Like, you would never think that a society would make parents who are already, saddled with the extra cost of raising a special needs child who's had all this brain injury from seizures, and they need special tutors, and they need special this and special that. And now I have to pay $1,000 a month or $12,000 a year, or whatever you said it was, $5,000 a year. Just to pay for a plant.
It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Tell me one quick thing to ask, because it's a bit early debate across here. If we did turn recreational in the UK, as you have in many of your states across there, did that impact on the medical prescription? Some concern here is that, okay, people will say, I'm fed up with the doctors, they're not going to give me what I want, I'm just going to go down the pharmacy, the dispensary down the road, and get it because it's legal now. Is that detrimental to the proper medical use, or what are your view on that?
No, it's actually, I got to see it here in Washington State, where we legalized in 2012, and we had medical cannabis since 2000 and 99 or 2000, around that time, 98, 99. So that was when medical was passed, and then 2012 recreational adult use, and that got implemented in 2014. So it's been about 8 years or something like that, 9 years. And no, what from a medical standpoint, I can tell you, it's actually a lot. There's a filtering effect that happens. So now the patients that sort of seek medical advice and medical prescription, or what we call authorization, they're very much like selected because the patients who really didn't need a doctor's advice much in the first place were generally able to self-regulate and find out what works for them or experiment within parameters. They generally did that, and they didn't come to the office. But now you have room in the office for patients. Well, I want to make sure this is not interacting with my other medicines. I want to make sure I know there's tons of varieties out there. Can you give me some guidance on how I would dose this, how I would approach this? Some patients need it for their work, their jobs, so it's still a very much alive and well system. And in fact, it's sort of,
good. That's
I think everyone sort of recognizes, oh, this is still here. So that must mean it's not just, it was not subsumed by recreational and it just disappeared. No, it's actually, and now doctors even, I think, respect it more. They're like, oh yeah, that's sort of that's still here because there's still a need for that. If you don't need it like that, then you can just, like you said, you're over 21, you can go to the shop and you don't have to go to no health insurer or doctor's order as necessary. So I do believe that it has been an improvement in people understanding the way in which a substance can live in different systems, and it's still valid for each system, as opposed to people always said, oh, medical is just a fake. That's not the real system. The real system that you want is adult use, and you don't really care about, and that's what I think these states have all learned. Now, there's been an issue where people have been lumped in, like there's less variety, there's less attention to the medical needs of patients in the shops, but there are still shops around that really do specialize in that and do take the
that's
care.
reassuring. So you've got good quality pharmacists I'm sure not everywhere, but the bud tenders, you call them, they're well trained and can give you decent, sensible advice.
We have a training program. I mean, it's not the greatest, but it does. I noticed that, and I know some places even hire nurses and some health professionals.
Good. Yeah.
And so we have those options, not everywhere, of course. I still think, but the nice thing, patients can sort of get a consultation from a physician, even in a different state. It may have to pay for it out of pocket, but there are more and more doctors that are specializing in that, and that's through telemedicine. You can access that even in the rural hinterlands.
At least we have telemedicine now. That's the only advantage of COVID, is it moved us. The authorities here were absolutely against telemedicine. We couldn't do it. We had to be face to face with the patient. COVID came along; they didn't have a choice. So now all the clinics are now telemedicine, and we've shown actually you can do this. So it's let's be positive about something with COVID. That was a big difference.
That is a good sign. I'm glad to hear that.
Overall, I think we're giving a
note here. We're almost done. Yeah, we're at
talking too long. Yeah.
Is there any? I guess it's great to talk. Well, maybe we should close. Is there anything that you want to plans for the future or learning moments?
We've covered a lot there. I'm still very optimistic. I'm obviously disappointed. We're 10, 20 years behind many parts of the States. What I would love to see as a final thing is if I like Joe Biden's note last week. Last week, Thursday, a move towards federal legalization. That'll be great from our point of view across the pond here. Then we'll get a lot of the expertise that lies in the States will begin to come across here. More investment, which we need. A lot of the expertise you've got about how to manage the more complicated cannabinoids and terpenes, which we haven't got. So my view is I'm still optimistic, and I'd like Joe to see what you can do with Joe Biden to persuade him to get on with it. Could you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I'll do my best here. But it is a good sign. It really it did change. Again, the idea that all those judges and prosecutors and police officers that spent all that time convicting, not tons of people, but there was enough it was a lot of federal resources spent to convict people for marijuana, cannabis possession. And oops. Actually, we should have never done that. That was a wrong-headed thing to do. You made these people's lives way worse. That was a mistake, and of course, that's going to. If you're going to do that if that's a mistake in the past, it's going to be a mistake now. It's going to be a mistake going forward. So it's sort of the domino. I think that obviously, if that's not a wrong thing to do, if those judges and prosecutors wasted their time doing that in the past, they're not going to waste their time doing it again in the future. It's like, you already told me that was a stupid thing to do. So you shouldn't be using the look at everybody. I think that's what I'm. So you guys could also run with that politically which is important. It's a political move, before the elections here. We have elections next month, midterms. So I think, and of course, the rescheduling or descheduling hopefully will.
I hope so. Yeah, we had a last point. We had a thing this with our Home Secretary decided that they wanted to discuss moving cannabis back into Class A.
Oh no!
And that I had to tell
wow. Oh well, I
television,
don't think they're
for
going to say
heaven's
that now.
sake, it was just appealing to the right wing. Right wing.
Oh, that was before your new prime minister.
It was last week. This week, the new Home Secretary said we should think about moving it to Class A.
After Biden's announcement,
after Biden's announcement. It was just, I mean, for heaven's sake. So, the Prime Minister Liz Truss now has said that we're not actually considering that. So the government is a little bit in turmoil, but hopefully that won't happen. Hopefully we'll move in the right direction with the stream that's going on in the world. So I'm still confident we'll get there.
Yes.
And we will have this conversation in another 5 years, and we can tell you how far we've come.
Wonderful, Professor. I look forward to that, and good work on what you're doing there. And I look forward to helping bridge our understandings, because this will make a huge difference for the lives of patients with neurological disorders.
It does. That's
pain,
what
and
encourages me to keep going with it all. It makes such a difference to people, and it's good to see. So anyway, it's great to talk to you. Good to meet you, and great to talk to you, and all the best with what you're doing, and we'll try and catch up.
Okay, brilliant. Take care then.
Okay, thank you.